Hello everybody and welcome to Omnipoke, the channel that brings you guys everything Pokemon. I'm Jack and today I have a deck analysis for you guys. This one's going to be on, featuring some cards from the new set, Breakpoint. It's going to be one of the first Breakpoint deck analysis videos we've got. It's going to be the standard format and we're going to be looking at Greninja BREAK. Easily my favourite card of the new set, and it has some incredible sort of damage output on him. This is easily my favourite of the new archetypes coming out of the new set and in the new format. So yeah, I'm just going to jump straight into it pretty much. I will quickly note though, we don't have English scans for some of the cards, and I don't own a couple of them that are released anyway. So there are a couple of proxies in here, but anything that we don't have the English scans for, I have the translations. Or I know what the translations are, and we pretty much know everything else that I unfortunately don't have copies of. But anyway, onto the Pokemon line. We're going to start with 3 Froakie. These are kind of placeholder Froakie. The new Froakie from Breakpoint is much better. For 1 Water Energy bubble, flips a coin, and on a heads, your opponent's active Pokemon is now paralyzed, much like Nuzzle from on the XY Pikachu. Also has 60 HP, whereas the old one has 50 HP. So that's definitely the one to play. I'm just kind of putting these guys here to show that we are playing 3 Froakie. For some reason, it wouldn't let me make proxies of the new Froakie, so I had to just sort of use the old Froakie as placeholders. But this is the star of the deck, pretty much. Not the Greninjas, it's actually the Frogadiers. Frogadier, for 1 Water Energy, can use the attack Water Clone, search your deck for up to 3 Frogadier, and put them onto your bench. So basically, with 1 Frogadier active, you can get 3 Frogadier onto the bench, meaning you can get 4 Frogadier out in 1 turn if none of them are prized, which is incredibly good. It kind of cuts the evolution line down to a stage 1 from a stage 2, and then a stage 2 if you're considering the break rather than the stage 3. So it's really useful to be able to get these guys out. Obviously, we're running the Froakie to be able to evolve into the Frogadier straight away. There are a couple of other engines we can use, and we will be featuring different ways of playing this deck on the channel over the next couple of weeks, because all 3 of the ways that you can play this deck have very different play styles and very different builds. So rather than try and lump them all into one, we wanted to separate them out just to show you the 3 different play styles you can really have with this deck. That being said, this is why the deck works so well. You can get 3 Frogadier out on turn 2 pretty much, and it means you have access to so many Greninjas straight away. The Greninjas have really good abilities as well, which I'll be going into in a second. So it's really nice to be able to get multiple copies of these Pokemon out at once. And Water Clone is basically the bread and butter of the deck. That's what makes this deck work so well. So yeah, we've got a 3-4 line, just like we say, because you only need 1 Froakie to activate the Frogadier. That being said, later on in the game, if a couple of your Greninja die, it is nice to still have a couple of Froakie on the bench, just to be able to use Sacred Ash to shuffle your Pokemon back in, and then evolve up manually. Frogadier just kind of speeds up the deck's first half, with the Froakies in there for support later on once you've lost a couple of your Greninja to your opponent. Next up, we're going to be looking at the Greninja. We've got 4 Greninja here, 2 from XY base and 2 from XY9. I'll start off with the XY base one because we're pretty much mainly running it for this Water Shuriken ability. Water Shuriken letting you discard an energy or Water Energy from your hand once per turn, and then deal 30 damage to one of your opponent's Pokemon, or put 3 counters on one of your opponent's Pokemon. So very not synergistic, very similar to Crobat. Rather than having to discard an energy, Crobat will drop down and put 3 straight away. This isn't quite as sort of proactive as Crobat if you don't have the Water Energy, but it can be used multiple times throughout the game rather than just the 1 Crobat and then having to pick it all up and do it again. As long as you've got one of these guys on the bench, you can do this every turn, providing you have the Water Energy to do so. Just to note, his attack is okay. Mist Slash for 1 water doing 50 damage. Isn't affected by weakness and resistance or any effects on your opponent's active Pokemon. It's okay, it's a half decent attack. It's nice that it's only 1 energy cost. It means that we don't have to do too much setup if we do have to attack with this guy. But we're primarily going to be wanting to attack with the new Greninja. This also has 1 retreat, whereas this new one has 3 retreat, so that is important as well. So yeah, these new Greninja are are absolutely fantastic, to be quite honest with you. This first attack, Shadow Slip, does, for one colourless, does 40 damage, and then until the end of your opponent's next turn, they have no abilities, basically. So it's like a Hex Maniac built in with 40 damage, plus you're not using your supporter for the turn, plus you're not sort of hurting your own abilities. So this attack is fantastic, especially if you can sort of use it on a turn where you can see your opponent's going to be using a lot of abilities. Maybe they've started to discard their hand, and you can predict they've maybe got a Shaymin, something like that, or any deck that relies on abilities every turn. This pretty much shuts them off and still does damage. Initially, the translation on Poker Beach didn't say it did 40 damage. We then looked back at the card and it did 40 damage as well, which is insane. I thought the attack was quite good, just sort of using it as a Hex Maniac, because your damage output can be from abilities rather than attacking. But now it does 40 damage as well. This card just gets better and better, really. And then the second attack, Gecko Slash, for 60 damage. One Water Energy does 60 damage, and you may return a Water Energy, attach this Pokemon to your hand if you do 20 more damage. So 80 for 1, potentially, bouncing the energy back into your hand. That's completely fine, because then we can discard it with Water Shuriken or Giant Water Shuriken, which we're going to come to in a second. So yeah, you're pretty much always going to be choosing to do the 80 over 60, just because it's 1 more damage, and 2, you can reuse the energy, which is really, really nice. The final thing to note is this guy has free retreat, which is quite useful when it comes to the break, which I'll get onto in a second. But it's just nice having a free retreater to go into once your opponent has knocked out one of your Pokemon. Sorry, it's nice having a free retreater just so you don't have to make an on-the-spot decision. You can perhaps decide once you've looked at a little bit more of your deck, or perhaps used a couple of cards first. So yeah, 2 of each of the Greninja. Both are incredibly useful. Both have this one has a half decent attack and a really good ability. This one has 2 really good attacks. And between them, they can either go down more of a locking route with the ability disruption, sorry, or they can go for an aggressive route, doing 80 damage plus 30 snipes each turn. Plus, with the 2 Greninja Break we're running, 60 snipes per turn. So Greninja Break, to start off, has 170 HP, which is fantastic. Has the HP of an EX, giving up only 1 prize, which is insane. And his ability, Giant Water Shuriken, as long as Greninja is in the active spot, once during your turn you may discard a Water Energy from your hand. If you do, deal 6 damage to one of your opponent's Pokemon. So that's, just putting it this way, that's 2 bat drops just for 1 energy that can be used multiple times as long as Greninja's out, in between like multiple turns, not multiple times per turn, but multiple turns. So as long as you've got a Greninja active, one turn you can do it. As long as it stays active, again you can do it. That's the equivalent of 4 bat drops. Admittedly, it isn't as varied as 4 bat drops, because the 4 bat drops can target 4 different targets, whereas this can only target 2. But you're doing 60 damage, so what does it even matter? You're doing 60 damage before you even attack. Just some nice little combos you can do with this, so that's why it's important that we have the free retreat. Because this only works in the active position, we do sometimes have to switch between them just to be able to use both Giant Water Shurikens in a turn. It's nice because 2 Giant Water Shurikens will knock out a Shaymin without you even attacking, so that's 2 prizes just based on abilities, which is really nice. And then 2 normal Water Shurikens and 2 Giant Water Shurikens will knock out an EX with 180 HP, so a high HP EX that isn't Wailord. In 1 turn without even attacking. That's before you even consider maybe ability locking your opponent or doing another 100 damage. The potential for this card is incredible. Like I say, this is easily my favourite card in the set, and it's just so strong. Being able to choose where you place your damage, you can control the board so well. Any evolution decks you come up against, you can get rid of their evolutions before they even evolve them into their first stage or second stage. Does huge damage to EXs, free retreat, 170 HP. There's nothing not to like about this card, or these Pokemon. All of them are incredibly useful, and I think this is honestly easily, from testing, my favourite deck so far. It just has so much control to it. You really control where you're putting your damage, where you're taking your prizes, how quickly you're taking your prizes. I feel like the deck's biggest downfall is it kind of has a relatively slow early game. Because you have to always have a Froakie out to evolve into the Frogadier, to evolve into, and then to use Water Clone, and more often than not, that Frogadier will then die, just because they've been out as a Froakie and a Frogadier. So more often than not, your opponent is probably going to have some sort of board set up to be able to deal with a Frogadier. But that being the case, if they deal with one Frogadier, you've just placed 3 on your bench. That's why we're also running more than just 1 or 2 Froakie, because we can then bench Froakies later on, just to be able to carry on using these Greninjas if we shuffle them back into the deck with our Sacred Ash. So yeah, this whole line is insane. It's I don't know how to put it into words. This is such a fantastic Pokemon. High damage output, potential to lock, built-in sort of acceleration of Pokemon. You don't need rare candies in this deck because Frogadier does it itself. I just love this deck. It's insane. Moving on to support Pokemon, we have a 2/2 Octillery. I actually don't own any Octillery, which is kind of unfortunate. But I have ordered 2 just because they're an incredibly good card. To start off, we have the Wild River Remoriad. Not too important, but this one, at least if you attach an energy, you can switch out of the active with it. The other one discards a Stadium, but sometimes you'll see it a little bit later on. It is beneficial for us to have Stadiums. Obviously, things like Rough Seas will benefit us anyway because we're doing more we're reducing the amount of damage done to us. But we also do play a Delinquent, meaning that we do sometimes like Stadiums in play just to be able to disrupt our opponent further. But we're pretty much playing Octillery just for the Octillery. 90 HP, which means it is levelable searchable. We don't actually play levelable, but it is levelable searchable. I don't really know why I brought that up. But Abyssal Hand is the sort of key area in this card. Abyssal Hand letting you draw up to 5 once during your turn, which is really, really nice. Draw until your hand is at 5 cards. Not draw up to 5 cards, that would be far too strong. Because we're discarding so much energy with these guys, it really means we have a low hand size a lot of the time. And Abyssal Hand means that we can build our hand back up. If we haven't used any of the abilities yet, we can get more energy to be able to do more damage. This is kind of like using a pseudo supporter without using our supporter. So as you can see, there are a lot of effects in this deck that sort of have similar effects to supporters, but don't actually use supporters, meaning we have a lot of room to use more techie supporters to disrupt our opponent further, like I said with the Delinquent, things like that, and still sort of pull our strategy off. We can use Hug, we do have the energy too, but we're never going to be using Hug pretty much ever. There's far better attackers to be dealing with our opponent, but yeah, 2/2 Octillery just means you always have access to being able to draw your hand back up and get more energy if you need be. We have a Miltank, Powerful Friends, simply because we're running a stage 2. Powerful Friends means that we're doing 80 damage for 1 energy, or 100 if we attach a Muscle Band, which means if we only have these Mist Slash Greninjas out, rather than dealing 50 damage, we do have access to deal 100 if we want. Pretty much as simple as that. Any stage 2 deck, you'll probably see a Miltank in there at some point. There's nothing really special about it, other than the fact that it's a really efficient attacker in stage 2 decks. And then finally, one Shaymin. Because of the Abyssal Hand and the compressor engine, we do run a compressor engine, pretty much a full compressor engine in here. You don't need all that much extra draw because you're going through your deck so quickly. A lot of the cards in your deck are sort of active all the time, so we only really need one Shaymin. Though Shaymin can be nice on the early turns just to ensure you do get the Frogadier. Again, nothing really important. You can Sky Return, it's another option, but because all these guys only have a 1 attack cost, you're pretty much just going to be attaching to them, more often than not bouncing the energy back, so you're going to have to use the attachment on the Greninja again. So it's not all that necessary to use Sky Return with Shaymin, but you do have access to it. Okay, so moving on, we have 4 Sycamore, simply because it's, again, a really, really good supporter. Best draw supporter we have in the game. Some decks are cutting it down to 3, some even 2. I'm going to be profiling a deck in the next couple of days that actually only runs 2 Sycamore, which is kind of crazy. But in this deck, just because you need to be hitting your Frogadier turn 2 all the time, we are running 4 Sycamore. Next up we have 2 Fisherman. Obviously both the Greninja Break and the XY Greninja require you to discard your energy to be able to use their abilities, which usually isn't an issue. But later on in the game, if we're looking for some more energy, we can indeed Fisherman them back into the hand. It's also really nice because we have 1, 2, 3, 4 different abilities that discard energy. So we can actually use a Fisherman to get 4 energy back, and then discard them all again, doing 180 damage. So basically, Fisherman is kind of like do 180 damage to one of your opponent's Pokemon if you do have all 4 of the Greninja out, or 2 Greninja Break and 2 Greninja out, which is incredibly good. Again, it's really nice recovery. More often than not, what I like to do is discard 1 with Battle Compressor, just so we have access to it with VS Seeker, but then keep 1 in the deck just in case we draw into it as well, because there's no point in having 2 in the discard unless we're really hunting for something. So yeah, that's the general kind of way I use Fisherman. Really nice for getting the energy back, especially with all of the different discard mechanics we have in the deck. And it also means we don't mind discarding energy as part of Ultra Balls and things like that as well. Next up we have one Bridget. The Bridget because we only run one EX, which is a Shaymin, we're pretty much always going to be going for the use where you get 3 basics non-EXs rather than EXs. You're pretty much never going to use it with Shaymin anyway, but even so, this gets us 3 Froakie, this gets us a Froakie into Remoriad, this gets us a Froakie, a Remoriad, and a Miltank, which is incredibly good. It means you have outs to your draw, it means you have outs to your Frogadier turn 1, or turn 2, sorry. It means you have outs later on in the game for an extra Frogadier, and then an extra Greninja, once one of your Greninjas has gone down. Basically, Bridget is pretty much always going to be your turn 1 supporter, the support you look for on turn 1, just to be able to fill your board with Froakies, and then Frogadiers, and then Greninjas. It is important to note, though, you can't fill your bench with more than 3 Pokemon, because then if you have 3, or more than 2 Pokemon, because then if you have 3 Frogadier in the deck, you can actually only get 2 out. So it is important to just get 2 Pokemon with Bridget. But that being said, it's such a good card still. Pretty much any deck that runs sort of non-EXs, I think will run at least 1 or 2 copies of Bridget at the moment. We only really need 1 just because we don't need Froakie straight away. We search for the Frogadiers with Frogadier, so we can save it up and use the Bridget later on if we need to. Next up we have one Ace Trainer. Like I say, this deck is probably going to lose the first prize simply because you're not attacking straight away, you're using Water Clone. You probably are going to lose the first prize, which means Ace Trainer is active pretty much from turn 2 or 3. You do definitely swing the prizes later on, and you do end up taking more prizes than your opponent really quickly, but if you can Ace Trainer on the turn that you're perhaps going to take 2 or 3 prizes and go ahead in the game, you can really put your opponent behind, especially if you have ability locks them as well, meaning that they can't use their Shaymins to draw up to 6 again. Ace Trainer is seeing a lot more popularity over here in the UK as well lately. A lot of people sort of dismissed it, me included. I didn't think it was all that good to start with when it was first released, but I can definitely see the use for it now, and it's definitely one of the most worthy inclusions in the deck, I think, just because you have access to be able to use it so early, because you're often sacking off a Frogadier just to be able to get your other Frogadier out, which is completely fine. Next up we have a Zerosic. The Zerosic is in here for Toad Garb, is one of its main uses, being able to discard the tool from the Garbodor under item lock, meaning that you can then use your abilities and then kill the Garbodor, and then kill any subsequent Trubbish that come out. Is pretty much the main use for it. It can get rid of DCEs or special energy, it can get rid of other tools, obviously, but the primary use for it is going to be dealing with Toad Garb and getting through that item lock to be able to get your ability, get through that item lock, but get through their ability lock as well, and take out the Garbodor in 1 turn, which is really nice. We have one Lysander. We only really need 1. Most decks run 1 or 2. This one only really needs 1 simply because there's so much sniping potential. You can easily pick off bench targets. Like I said earlier on, 2 breaks or a break and 2 normal Greninjas, or just a break and some previous damage sometimes will kill a Shaymin. So you often don't need to Lysander up Shaymins to be able to kill them. You can just do it using the abilities. But at least we do have the option to stall if we need to, or take the last 2 prizes on Shaymin if we perhaps kill one with the 2 breaks, and then have to do 30 damage and then attack with a different Greninja. We do have outs to do that. So one Lysander is always really useful. And then finally for our supporters we have one Delinquent. What Delinquent will do, you discard a Stadium in play, and if you do, look at your opponent. Your opponent chooses 3 cards from their hand and discards them. You don't get to look at your opponent's hand. That's the other new supporter from the set. So again, this can be really disruptive, especially if you've ability locked them as well. They can't draw into Shaymin to build their hand back up. They can't draw into anything that would get them into Shaymin to build their hand back up. They have to rely on getting a supporter or another draw card, and it can really put some people in awkward spots. We don't actually run any stadiums of our own in here, so more often than not, this would just be compressed away, and sometimes it won't even be used in the game, because the stadium is required to be able to use this card. But in any deck that does have a stadium, it works not only as a counter stadium, but as a disruption card as well. And paired with the disruption from the new Greninja, being able to lock abilities, and then the sniping potential to take out 2 or 3 prizes worth of Pokemon in a turn, Delinquent can really put your opponent behind, which is really nice. It's definitely an incredibly good card from the new set. It's not one I'm a huge fan of, just because I don't like the idea of being able to get you discard have to discard 3 cards from your hand at once. But that being said, I do respect how good it is, and that's why, even though I don't particularly like the card, it is definitely a worthy inclusion in here. And then as per, we are running 4 VS Seeker. As you can see, we are running Battle Compressors as well, so 4 VS Seeker is more preferable than 3. Some decks only run 3, but with the Battle Compressor combo, we definitely need to run 4 just to be able to get into our one-off supporters as often as we can. We have 5 one-off supporters in the deck, so it is really important to be able to get them when we need them. So moving on to the normal items, we have 3 Battle Compressor. Like I've just said, Battle Compressor gets rid of all of your supporters you don't need straight away into the discard. It can actually be quite synergistic being able to get energy into the discard, because it kind of works like a Professor's Letter then as well. If you say get rid of discard 2 energy, and then use either the Energy Retrieval that I'm going to come to in a second, or maybe even a Fisherman, if you've got a couple of energy in there already, you can kind of use it as a Professor's Letter as well, which is really nice. But pretty much just dumping whatever you don't need is always really nice as well. It makes it so that the deck is really thin, and you know all of your outs are going to be really useful, which is definitely a worthwhile inclusion. And that's why I think the Battle Compressor VS Seeker engine is working so well at the moment, just because you have so much control over what support you're playing and what you're drawing, things like that. We have 4 Dive Ball. All but 2 of our Pokemon are water types, so these are Ultra Balls for water types without discarding the cards. There's nothing more to say. They just search for everything in the deck, bar the Miltank and the Shaymin. Yeah, it's just so nice being able to just search for anything when you want, as long as you have one of these Dive Balls. That being said, we are also running 2 Ultra Ball to be able to search for the Miltank and Shaymin, and discard cards if we need to with Shaymin, to then Shaymin for a few cards, but also just because it's nice to have a couple of other cards to be able to search for our Pokemon and carry on with our sort of Greninja damage train. We have 1 Startling Megaphone. Again, another nice thing for pretty much anything that isn't Toad Garb that still plays Garbodor. Garbodor is a real big issue for this deck, simply because it shuts off all of the abilities, so it is important to be able to deal with that as often as possible. We have the Zerosic to be able to deal with it in Toad Garb, where you're not able to use the Megaphone, and then Megaphone for anything else. Another nice thing to do is kind of use it as a little bit like a Devolution Spray, things like that. Not a Devolution Spray, but for your opponent's side of the field. There's been games where perhaps an EX has a Fighting Fury belt, so it's got plus 40 HP. If you do just enough to go into that plus 40 HP, and then Startling Megaphone off the Fighting Fury belt, they have too much damage on for them to be able to take, and you do get the knockouts that way. You can easily take 2 or 3 prizes going down that route as well. There have been games where sort of a Yveltal's been active with all but 10 HP left, and he's stuck a Fighting Fury belt. Well, all I've had to do is use one of the weaker attacks, and then go for Startling Megaphone, and you'll take 2 prizes again before you attack. And those 2 prizes can definitely be influential on what you're going to do next within the game, so it's definitely nice to be able to take 2 prizes in multiple different ways early on in the game, just to be able to sort of have more options when it comes to making decisions later on. We have 1 Energy Retrieval, like I just mentioned. Being able to get 2 energy back from your discard to use more abilities without using your supporter is really nice. It's definitely really useful. Obviously, it's nowhere near as good as Fisherman, but Fisherman is a supporter, so it's not meant to be. yeah, that's pretty much why we're going to use it. We're going to pick up 2 energy, and then probably discard them straight away, in all fairness, but discard them for some more damage. Pretty much the same with 1 Professor's Letter. We're going to search the deck for 2 energy, and then discard them using the abilities, just to be able to carry on through our deck and carry on doing damage as well. It's a nice reduction of 2 in the deck as well. This deck can get really thin really quickly, just so you know exactly what you have left in the deck. There's been times where, sort of, as I'm going to talk about with Sacred Dash in a second, there's only been Pokemon in the deck, so I know I'm going to be getting either a Frogadier or a Greninja next turn to be able to then evolve, well, continue to evolve and get another stream of Greninjas going for those last couple of prizes at that point. That's why, again, we're running the Sacred Dash. Sacred Dash means that we can happily sort of lose that first prize with the Froakie and Frogadier, maybe even lose a Greninja as well, and still get all of the pieces back into the deck. We can get great breaks back as well, which is really nice, especially if your opponent starts to target your breaks, realizing that they're a powerhouse. If your opponent decides to sort of aim for them instead, that's not necessarily all of your breaks gone, because you can search for, or shuffle them back in with Sacred Dash, which is really nice. And then we have 1 town map. Town map has what wasn't originally included in the list, but in testing we found if even one of your Frogadier is prized, it is a lot more difficult to win the game. It is definitely still winnable, but it's a lot more difficult just because you don't have access to all of these Frogadier at once. You're happily losing one. You're happy to lose one because you still have 3 Frogadier, which means you can have one of the new ones doing damage, and then 2 of the old ones just sort of bench sniping. But if you only have 2, if one of them's prized, it's really, really rough, because you then have to choose what Frogadier, what Greninja line you want to look for. It's also pretty annoying if you perhaps prize some of the Greninjas or the breaks themselves. So it's definitely nice knowing what prizes you're taking. Another nice thing is because you can take prizes mid-game, mid-turn, you can use the town map to take the prizes you need in that turn to be able to then carry on going and pretty much continue to take more prizes that turn. You know you're not risking, oh, I hope I get the second Greninja break here to be able to do another 60, and then you miss it. This way you know exactly what you're getting and can carry on sort of doing all of this damage at once. Finally, on to the tools, we have 2 Muscle Band and 2 Floatstone. The 2 Muscle Band mean that we can do 100 with Miltank and 100 with the new Greninja, or 60 depending on which attack we're using. That's pretty much all we're going to be using them for, but it does make some nicer math situations, especially because we have so much versatility with our bench sniping. We can really sort of pick and choose and make sure we do the optimal amount of damage with these Pokemon by including Muscle Band. We then have 2 Floatstone. If you have to use your Break Evolution on one of the Greninja that doesn't have free retreat, this way you don't have to discard an energy to be able to use both Greninja in the turn. Sometimes, like I say, because you're going to be bouncing the energy back from your new Greninja into your hand, it's going to mean you have to spend your attachment for that turn to be able to attack. So you can't really spend it on retreating. So having the Floatstone means that we can also switch between our Greninjas without wasting retreat cost. Energy on retreating. It's also really nice for Octillery. Octillery has a pretty chunky retreat cost, so it's nice to be able to not have him as a capture target as well. And yeah, it's just for pretty much moving your board around a little bit. There's nothing really sort of special or synergistic with this, other than the fact that you can use both Greninjas much more easily, which is really nice. And then finally we have 8 Water Energy. We tried it with 9, it was a little bit too high, we didn't need all of them. We tried it with 7, and we weren't hitting the numbers enough. 8 seems to be optimal for me. You have the energy when you need it, you can discard it happily with Ultra Balls and Sycamores, things like that, and you still have access to it with Fisherman and Energy Retrieval. You have the energy to attack, you have the energy to use your abilities. It's just a really, really nice number. But yeah, that's the deck. This is easily my favourite deck out of the new set. My favourite archetype out of the new set. Me and Joe have been testing this new set for a couple of weeks now, and this Greninja deck has come up trumps, so I definitely implore you to try it. It is such a fun deck as well. Being able to sort of put damage everywhere, choose so many choose where all of the counters go is really, really strong. Yeah, it's just so strong. EXs, non-EXs, it's pretty much strong against everything. The biggest issues, like I said, Garbodor is a huge issue, just because it shuts off your abilities. And then Sceptile is another really big issue, because it has Theta Stop, which means that your abilities don't affect it, and it also has weakness on you. So unfortunately, Sceptile is kind of an auto loss. It's not a complete auto loss, but it is not a nice matchup at all. It's definitely far favoured in there on their side of the field. So it's not at all a nice matchup. It's obviously not unwinnable, because sometimes they just have bad starts, things like that. But it's not a nice matchup to play at all. But other than that, so far we haven't found anything that completely destroys this deck. Garbodor is an issue, obviously, because it shuts off your abilities, and Sceptile because it doesn't let you, it kind of shuts off your abilities as well. It's pretty rough. But yeah, thank you very much for watching. We have a load of breakthrough decks coming to you guys over the next few weeks. So make sure you stay here on Omnipoke. We have so much we want to share with you guys. We're really enjoying this new format. So yeah, thank you very much for watching. I've been Jack from Omnipoke, and I will see you in another video.